Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Wherever you are in the world, I want to welcome you to today's Hangout. I'm Tom Murphy, Editorial Director of the BPI Network and lead author of the report we'll be talking about today. With me is Kevin Leahy, Group General Manager for Data Center Solutions at Dimension Data. We're going to be talking today about this report from BPI's Transform to Better Perform initiative, which explores some of the major changes underway in the way we store, access, and use data in business. It's a field that's absolutely exploding and one that Kevin deals with on a daily basis. This program is sponsored by Dimension Data and DatacenterDyamics, two organizations at the forefront of this business transformation. More specifically, we'll be talking about the details of this report that came out through this project. The report itself is called Accelerating Business Transformation Through IT Innovation, and it was based on a major global survey of senior business executives undertaken this summer by BPI. The report also includes the viewpoints of many business leaders we interviewed over the past several months in regions from Asia Pacific, across the Americas, to Europe, and to Africa. Before we go any farther, I want to make you all aware that you can download your very own copy of this report by going to reinventdatacenters.com. It's a $200 value, but it's completely free once you register. While there, please take a look around. This is the online home of Transform to Better Perform initiative, and it's chock full of stories, reports, and other information you'll want to know if your organization sees the future of its technology program rising to the cloud. That address again is reinventdatacenters.com. Now it's time to introduce my colleague in the project, Kevin Leahy. Kevin's a New Yorker who's in project his fourth year with Dimension Data. He has about 15 years of experience in the areas of cloud, service management, virtualization, and IT optimization. He also has about 20 years experience in product and technology development and delivery in systems, networking, and energy technology. Kevin, it's great to have you with us.
Well, thanks, Tom. Thanks for asking me to participate.
That's super. Now let's jump into the discussion itself. The BPI network report is quite long, but there are four fundamental conclusions that we'll use to frame today's discussion. The first has to do with the rising importance of hybrid technologies in today's hyper-competitive business world. So I'm going to read through some data points here and then give Kevin a chance to respond to these and tell me his observations from the field of what he's seeing when he goes visits businesses. First, from the C-suite to operational units, senior managers are eager to see progress in implementing a broad range of technologies that increase their agility, improve customer experience, and make their companies more competitive. 2/3 of our responses say that technology has become far more important to their organizations in just the past 5 years. And 5 years ago, if you can remember back then, technology was pretty darn important. Another 28% see it as somewhat more important. So 93% are saying technology is more important than 5 years ago. Almost half say they're spending more time understanding strategic implications of new technologies. Now these are business leaders, not IT pros. And another 38% say they're working on it. The three most pressing IT imperatives that we found in the survey were to improve responsiveness to the ever-changing business requirements they face. About more than a third said that. Focusing on digital experience as a competitive advantage, and delivering applications faster, better, and at a lower cost. The three areas that would benefit most from transformative technologies were identified as operational efficiency and effectiveness, 52% shows that response. Customer experience, monetization, and retention, 33%. And organizational alignment, culture, and collaboration, 27%. So Kevin, you go out and talk to a lot of business leaders. Is this what you're seeing in the field right now?
I think what's interesting is what's changed over the last, I would say even the last decade, is continually we've seen the shift towards move faster. Particularly during the financial downturn, everyone was worried about how we did things cheaper. But as in the advent of cloud was really come to the forefront as the same time as people were coming out of the technology or the economic downturn. What we saw was people saying the first reason I'm going to do this.
Now we have a little technical glitch there, I think. Give Kevin a second to catch his breath. He was warning us as we went on that there might be thunderstorms in his area, so we will have to give him a second. You know, it's really been interesting for me. I've spent about 3 decades in technology, and it's been fascinating to see these responses come in. Just 4 or 5 years ago, we were still writing as journalists about how the cloud is new, and people really hadn't adopted it yet. And they were very worried about security. And now we're seeing business leaders themselves pushing for this and pushing for a movement into the cloud. I think Kevin's back with us now. Oh, just dropped off again. So what's happening here is we're seeing a shift from the ideas coming from the IT department to shifting over to the business department. There have been a lot of reports over the past few years that someday the CMO may be the new IT boss. And you'll see later in our findings that there's some evidence of that surfacing in this survey. See, Kevin's back with us again. Let's see if we can hear him now.
Can you hear me now? Let's ask the question.
That's nice and clear.
All right. I'm not sure where I dropped off. Storms have been rolling through the background there.
You only got about 10 seconds in there. So right. Let's go back to the question. All right. What are you seeing in the workplace now? Are business leaders really taking charge of IT?
I wouldn't say business leaders are taking charge, but they are actually expecting more of IT. And so when you would look at, let me save some money, how do I cut budget? Every time we come in now, and it's interesting because I was talking to a roundtable of CIOs recently, and they're also looking to do more for the business. So while the survey talks about how business is looking at IT wants to do more. They're looking to be able to deliver more value sooner and faster, and they're looking to deliver innovation. The challenge they have is they're hung up just keeping the lights on. How do they deal with the complexity of the existing world they're in, and how do they deal with the complexity of processes? And one kind of interesting dynamic you find is it's the person in the middle who everyone seems to blame. You know, the business is blaming IT for being slow, but IT is saying it's purchasing that won't let me do this because they evaluate what I'm doing on cost savings versus incremental value to the business.
Well, on that point, he's
figure out.
There he's back.
What people need to do is evaluate how do I show how IT is creating the business return, and frequently that's the first challenge. Is to show that you're actually giving the return to the business. Because it's, and interestingly enough, when we go in and do a cloud project, frequently the CIO is saying, help me justify this to the business. They want to do this. But how do you create the case where purchasing says, well, how much are you going to save? Rarely does the purchasing ask how much are you going to generate? And I think that's one of the interesting dynamics is getting everyone to figure out how is that IT actually contributing?
That's a really good point, and it ties into our second point and our third, which we'll get to in a few minutes. The second one is this again the conclusions of this report that just came out, the one you'll find at reinventdatacenters.com. And the second point that we came up with was specifically business leaders see major benefits from data center and cloud transformation. And there's 3 points I want to go over here. The top 3 benefits of data center and cloud transformation were identified in the survey as increased agility and responsiveness to business change, with 70% of the responses coming in on that. Greater cost efficiencies, more than half at 57%. And faster time to innovation for new applications. 47% of our sample said that. Now, executives plan to change their data centers. About 45% said they plan to modernize and upgrade them, and a similar number said they want to migrate to hybrid IT that blends traditional data centers with the cloud. Finally, 32% said they're consolidating servers, which of course, I think every company is doing that. 3 most transformative technologies to get a competitive edge were identified as the IoT, that network of sensors that we're all going to be living with soon. 35% came up with that, and about a third said highly scalable and web-based business models. And finally, 29% said social media data mining and more efficient engagement with their customers. Kevin, I'd like to ask you specifically about this middle point here, the modernize and upgrade 45% and migrate to hybrid IT. First, can you define this whole idea of hybrid IT for us?
Well, hybrid is, as by its definition, sort of a blending of everything. You know, in my definition, a hybrid is leveraging what you do in a dedicated data center, which may be your own, maybe a third party's, with a a cloud or some other solution of all that optimized work. Now, what does that mean to a client? Well, if you back it up to a business perspective, what many clients are telling me is, look, what is standard? What does not differentiate my business? I want to do software as a service. Or it won't be my email. The things that I'm differentiate, I'm going to customize. I'm going to do that in a dedicated data center. So in many cases, hybrid means a blending of truly differentiating things that I'm going to spend my time, energy, and skills on, and the standard things that I can do much more efficiently, through a third-party model. And so it's not just hybrid technology, but it's actually hybrid business models. Bring together the things that I'm going to change my business on. And frequently in that transformation step, it's about freeing up their resources to work on the things that's going to change the business. So in the technology world, we talk about northbound APIs, which talk to the business applications, and then southbound to infrastructure. Most times they're saying, I don't want to worry about that southbound stuff. I want to worry about the things that actually talk to my business applications. And then give me the optimum delivery model, because some of my users sit out there in the internet. They're going to be served better in the cloud. Some of my data sits in my data center and massively computing, learning those big data patterns. I might get real differentiating value by really exploiting that data. The hybrid application structure to support it. And where are you going to differentiate your business? And I actually met with one very, very large innovative company, and they showed me how year on year they spent all of this money staying 1% cheaper
I think those thunderstorms are rolling back into Kevin's territory in New York. I think I'll go on and skip to the next question. We'll come back and pick up Kevin when he's back with us.
And I just looked at him.
Oh, there he is.
Am I back?
Now I'm going to go on to the next question, and Kevin will come back with us in a moment, I'm sure. The third point was probably the most important of the survey. Overall, senior business managers are very dissatisfied with the pace of innovation in their IT organizations. They want new metrics to measure IT performance. So what we found was only 14% rate the level of innovation in their IT organizations as very high. Another 15% chose it as poor. Most gave it the middle ratings, making progress at 37%, or good at 33%. So overall, 47% on the upside, and if you want to add them together, 52% on the downside. More people are unhappy with their IT organizations and their level of innovation, than they are happy with it. Now, asked how well the IT organization is executing on its mandate to transform and become more strategic, only 14% said very well. Again, 10% said poor. And again, most were in the middle. If you total it up, you have about 42% on the upside and a whopping 54% on the downside, saying that their IT department is not really there yet as a valued business partner. That's a pretty important metric that we're looking at. Kevin, are you back with us now?
I think I am. You have to tell me. And
You are.
what percentage of people in this Hangout are dissatisfied with their wide area network?
It's always ironic to me that we're talking about advances in technologies and networks, and then we have a thunderstorm come and disrupt it. But that brings up an interesting point about data centers. I don't know if we want to, let's tackle it here. Redundancy is something, and disaster recovery is something that the cloud can really help with. That's something we covered more in our first report in this series, and you can also download that report at that same reinventdatacenters.com address. But Kevin, give me an example of how going to the cloud can help eliminate some of the problems that we're seeing here today with redundancy and reliability in the network.
Well, great example is just the bandwidth. We see most clients, if you went back to the east coast of the U.S. during Hurricane Sandy, data centers were out and their two private wide area networks, connections to those data centers were both down. In some cases, in New York City for 3 days. If their users of their applications could switch to the cloud, which we help many clients with, and they could access the cloud on the West Coast, they all had smartphones. They all could get to the cloud, but they couldn't get to their data center because their data center was underwater. So it's just an example of if you can distribute your workloads to multiple delivery models, how you could get around network outages. And so we see more and more people building hybrid environments where, it's not that the data center necessarily went down. It may have been underwater or surrounded by water, but the network to them went down. And so you actually look at how do I build high availability where I can distribute workloads all around the globe. And that then creates very, very different models of availability where any number of points can go down and yet the application, the users still see their applications coming back to them. But you started to point back to the dissatisfaction with IT. I think one of the problems, and I met with one travel company, and they actually asked us to come in and talk about how do you innovate. And I think, the question of what does innovation mean in IT is changed. It's not about data, and it's not necessarily purely about technology. A lot of and how people work, because monitoring in the old days, the way you would just monitor as a server up or as my storage at utilization targets or things like that, doesn't really ensure that a service is delivering at the end point, at the end of the network where I am, to the user. And what are the processes that allow that? I remember I met with one very large airline client a few years back, and they talked about the fact that the speed of innovation. And we had, at that time, movement of live virtual machines. We had all that there. But their actual business process forced 3 weeks of manual signatures before we were allowed to turn things on. And the network guys had to set up firewalls, and all sorts of rules had to be followed. So technology could do it in a minute. The process prevented that by weeks or months. And yet you would say, well, is that IT innovating? Well, they were using the best and really bleeding edge technology, but they weren't allowed to allow it to do its job because the business processes held it back. So in many cases, the innovation is actually going back and actually innovating the process and exploiting the technology that they may already have or the technology that's available in the cloud versus saying I need new technology. It's analyzing data that they have and gathering new data and looking for patterns. Those are the kinds of things that you really find out. It's can you turn on what you've got? Can you get any insights from what you have? And I know I'm going a little long here, but you never know when the network's going to cut out on me. But there's one other point I want to make. We worked with one very large financial firm. I was with them in Japan, and they talked about the big data project they had done. And I said they talked about years of developing these big data frameworks. And I said, what's interesting, what new decisions do you make? In many cases, what we find is the science outpaced the decision making, the insight. And more we see today is the focus in on, I want to be able to make a decision about this. Now, how do I do that? As opposed to, can I do big data pure for big data's sake? And so we just recently brought in a big data solution for a manufacturing company who really wanted insight on manufacturing quality. Well, they knew what they were looking for, and it's a lot easier to innovate when you know what kind of insight you're looking for than doing it in the pure abstract. And we find, having an objective, a problem to solve, drives innovation much faster than just looking at what can I do with this technology. It's the, do you have a hammer? What can I do with it? Versus I want to build this garage. Now I know exactly what tools I need.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And subsequent to conducting this survey, we interviewed a goodly number of CIOs, including at a CIO roundtable just 2 weeks ago in San Francisco. And one of the things I heard repeated several times in that session was that the engineers in IT really want to solve problems. They're problem solvers by nature. And too often there's a lack of communication between the teams where the business owners don't fully convey what the problem is they're having and give the engineers a chance to solve it. Instead, they come in with a technology and say, here, I want you to adopt this technology, and the IT person saying, why? And that leads to some friction, and that could be partly responsible for this low rate of this perception that there's a low level of innovation. But I think clearly there are some business metrics that business owners want to see. In our survey, they said, predictably enough, that reliability, scalability, and security of the IT infrastructure was paramount. That's 45% of the responses said that is the top metric. And I don't think there's a CIO in the country that would disagree with that. However, they also cited, we just kill that. They also cited, well, that's just noisy as heck. There we go. Gotta turn that off. Maybe disable my phone. They also cited as the number 2 need for IT as far as a metric goes, the ideas and solutions for furthering business performance, which is not a traditional IT function. To come up with ideas to increase business performance, or number 3, the quality and timeliness of app delivery. Clearly, there's a complaint there that apps are not coming along at the quality and with the speed that the business owners would like to see. So does any of that surprise you there, Kevin?
No, I mean, the reality is, as you mentioned, every CIO will be fired. If the data center is not up and running, you fail compliance, you certain things, you have to keep your job. The notion of speed of applications versus innovative ideas, I would say that's a horse race, because one leads to the other. What I find is kind of interesting is the challenge in terms of bringing the two communities together to figure out what to work. Interesting project a few years back that had a cloud, and another university that specialized in technology and business. That was the only 2 majors they had. And there what they created was a sort of a team where they would create 3 IT master students and 3 business master students, and they would bring them to a business inside that country and say, what's the new challenge? What's the new application model you can deliver? It was the notion of bringing the IT guy and the business guy together to go work on a problem and come up with innovative ideas. And they spread it across 50 or some odd businesses in that particular country as a way to drive innovation at a national level. Take that back to the macro view within business today. What are the ways you can reach a new market? What are the ways you can enable new users to use, that you can analyze new data? Well, the business guy may not know where the data sits. The IT guy knows where it is, how to get to it, how to manage it, how to secure it, but he may not know the life cycle value of the data. He may not know what to look for. And so we see more and more businesses saying, how do I bring these 2 communities together to drive that? Now, there's a fine line. Is that innovation or is that a new application? I think that's the one where people will interpret one over the other quite differently, and it varies quite different by business. You know, and certainly in consumer-facing businesses, you see the application priority. In the innovation side, you see more in the manufacturing and some of the other industries where they're looking for internal innovation versus client-facing innovation. But you know, certainly in the manufacturing sense, you see the same notion in 3D printing, right? Which is very much spin things up and try things. So the notion of fail fast comes up all of the time. Let's get out, let's try. Let's not invest, you know, millions in CapEx and years in development for something that may not be a great idea. If I can try it on a couple of VMs and pilot it in an area where I haven't participated before, if it goes great, then I'm going to scale it. I'm going to do the traditional management of it because I see the business value. And if it doesn't, nevertheless, I have the spirit of innovation inside my team because now they're willing to try things. They're willing to approach new ideas because it's not a high risk. It's not millions on the line. It's a little bit of energy. It's a little bit of expense, but usually very, very small of both. And we see some really creative things. One legacy bank I worked with was kind of interesting. Traditional mainframe sort of client. And they saw no value for cloud. And when you asked their biggest area of growth, it was online banking. So, well, how are you going to create that client relationship that you had when they came into the bank?
Yeah, that's a great question.
And so suddenly, client-facing innovation, which they'd never even considered, moved to the forefront on actually changing the experience for the client. So those are just, you know, some examples of how people are bringing IT and business together around that notion of innovation.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, we have about 2 minutes left, and I want to get through the fourth point here. Let me just rip through some of this. There's the fourth conclusion was there's a very clear disconnect across organizations between the recognized need to adopt new technologies and actually achieving that goal. And the top 5 barriers cited by our respondents were gaining consensus and support for new investments, determining the needs and optimal solutions available, minimizing the information security risk, successfully implementing and gaining organizational adoption, which I think is personally the toughest, and aging in IT infrastructures that need to be upgraded or modernized. In just a minute, can you tackle those? And are those the kinds of things you're seeing, Kevin, when you go into businesses?
Sure, we can answer all those in a minute. Sure. I mean, certainly the barrier of the legacy environment, which is why things like cloud and things like that are really opening up new doors. We already tackled the investment side of how much risk is there, or how much do I have to spend to try this idea. But the organization element, I think, is one that's absolutely forefront. And one of the things I found is when you find these barriers, I worked with a large manufacturing company in the Far East, and their best practice happened to sit in a different country than where their headquarters was. And the legacy environment didn't want to change. And this was a business process. We weren't talking technology now. And so one of the things we got into the middle of, do you change the process or do you change the people's perception of it? So in some cases, you can mask the change, allow people to do things the way they've always done it.
I hear another pause here. Hoping Kevin's not off the line now. Well, he's apparently gone. So I'm going to take. Oh, he's almost back. No, he's off again. I want to thank everybody for being with us today. I especially want to thank Kevin Leahy and other good folks at Dimension Data for providing the expertise and logistical support for our program. I want to thank our producer, JJ, who stayed up late to work with us. And I want to thank the good folks at the BPI Network for putting together this program. Finally, I want to remind you to check out our online community at reinventdatacenters.com. Be sure to download a copy of the report and the first report while you're there. Read and visit the advocacy section. You'll find articles and information about leading your own data center transformation. Kevin, I see you're back with us just in time to sign off. Would you like any final thoughts?
No, I think apologies for the ins and outs, but some things can't be helped. But I do really, encourage everyone on this to think about that notion of change. Number one forefront to every client I talk to is, driving more value to the business. The days of simply managing cost are behind us. And if you can take the innovative talent that sits within the data center and free it up, you find that I bet you will find there's skunkwork projects inside that environment that you don't even know about that you can start to take advantage of if you just go and ask.
Yeah, I think that's very sage advice and words. I hear sentiments like that all the time when I talk to CIOs and to business leaders across the world. Well, thank you for being with us for Dimension Data and the BPI Network. This is Tom Murphy signing off.